Did you see that horrible interview Sarah McBride did with Ezra Klein? In what way is it horrible? The thumbnail says the illiberalism of the left. That's great. That's pretty good. That's great.
Doing the hard work of opening hearts and changing minds and telling stories that over 20 years had shifted and deepened understanding on gay identities that allowed for marriage equality to be built on solid ground. And I think that allowed for the misinformation, the disinformation, that well-coordinated, well-funded campaign to really take advantage of that lack of understanding. And the support on trans rights was sort of a house built on sand.
I want to connect.
How does that work? Like at all? How is it a house built on sand? The problem, okay, the problem is that trans rights were always going to be more difficult than gay rights, because what gay people are asking for is essentially just to be incorporated into the pre-existing heteronormative system, right? Gay marriage was the fight. So you want to marry? Okay, can gay people marry or not? Pretty decisive question. Over time, more people became supportive, but it took longer than you might think. The problem with trans people is that you're not arguing like, well, can trans people get married? Sure. You're talking about a more fundamental, like deconstructed take. You have to take a look at these social concepts and you have to break them apart. You don't really have to break that much apart to accept gay marriage. Okay, so if you believe that God makes marriage between a man and a woman, like that's your line of thinking, sure. Okay, maybe you have to take apart a fundamental concept. But apart from religiously motivated thinking, for the most part, it's kind of just whether or not you're a bigot. You don't really have to be bigoted against trans people to not get it. It's kind of not intuitive. You have to learn all these things about sex and gender not being the same, and gender being constructed and socially determined, and that sex actually like sex isn't binary but bimodal with a bunch of like expressed differences and the science and like it's actually very, very, very complicated. And if you don't get it, I don't think that necessarily makes you a bigot. If you think gay people shouldn't be allowed to be married, I think you're a bigot, like basically by definition. Like I don't think that you're coming at that from a position of misunderstanding the question. I think you're coming at that from the position of you just don't think they should be able, like you're just bigoted, right? But with trans people, I don't necessarily fault somebody for not understanding the like radical gender deconstructivist takes, but that doesn't mean that trans activists overplayed their hand. That just means it's a more difficult question. And you really play into the fascists' rhetoric when you argue that the reason why, when like the Fourth Reich comes about, the reason why trans people lost their rights is because the trans people overplayed their hand. I don't think in the Weimar Republic that trans people got put to death camps because they overplayed their hand, and that's what led to the, you know, Third Reich emerging. I think that the Third Reich emerged, and that's why the trans people got put in camps. Vosh, please don't bash me, but I still don't understand how somebody doesn't feel their body doesn't fit their mind. Yeah, you do, don't you? You personally, at some point in your life, have felt a disconnect between how you want your body to look and how your body actually looks. Or you think sometimes, in my head, I feel like I'm coming across as stoic right now. I'm serving hard mask energy at this party. I'm standing in the corner giving cool, mysterious energy. But then you see a photo of yourself that a friend snapped and you look like a dork. You're standing, you're dumbass, standing over there like this. You've got a drink in your hand. You know, you're like this. In your head, you're like, dude, I'm like the dark wolf of this party. I'm like the alpha male. But in reality, you're like, you know, the disconnect exists in everybody, right? To an extent, the difference between the you up here and the you here, that's a universal human experience. Everyone gets that sometimes. The difference with trans people is that people don't ascribe biological essentialism to the concept of serving stoic at a party, but they do to something like gender. But in reality, it's fundamentally the same thing. What on a fundamental level, what you're talking about is a disconnect between how you perceive yourself and how the world perceives you. That's it. You know, everything else is like a superficial, socially constructed veneer that legitimizes less intelligent ways of thinking about it, like believing that gender equals sex or that there's something innate about any of this. But in reality, nah.
Two things you said there, because I hadn't thought about this exactly before. So you made this point that there's been a generalized gender aggression, which is true. And you also made this point that people had this metaphor in their minds that I was wrong about gay marriage. I didn't understand that experience. So maybe I'm wrong here too. But that one thing maybe that's different here is there's a set of narrow policies here, like non-discrimination, and then a broader cultural effort, right? Everybody should put their pronouns in their bio or say them before they begin speaking at a meeting. That was more about destabilizing the gender binary. And
what? This is like corporate PR training. What are we? We're doing the left-wing equivalent of pretending that anti-racist activists were the ones doing DEI training at like Raytheon or whatever. People putting their pronouns in their emails isn't trans rights. It's people trying to be inclusive, and sometimes they're doing it kind of in a condescending way, but like, what? It ain't that. It gets so bad, it's such an awful interview. I mean, it's Ezra Klein and Sarah McBride, so yeah, it's probably going to be pretty bad. It's pretty embarrassing. No allyship in her.
There, people had a much stronger view. Like, I do know what it means. I've been a man all my life. I've been a woman all my life. How dare you tell me how I have to talk about myself? Or
what? When did this happen? Also, this argument doesn't make any sense because people used it against gay people. Straight people said, I've been married for 20 years. How dare you suggest that the institution that I belong to could include men getting married to each other? People did the same thing. This is already a low IQ. Listen, pay no mind to the liberal Substack grifters whose job it is to always posture against the left. Literally, the thumbnail for this video right here is the illiberalism of the left. They're arguing that the left should have been less aggressive in pushing for trans rights, which somehow translates into the left being illiberal. I guarantee you this podcast goes into how like it's tyrannical to expect regular people to understand pronouns or something. It's a joke. These people are grifters, or if they're not, they're shockingly stupid, which isn't any better. You don't need to buy it, okay? There is an entire cottage industry of people whose job it is to convince you transgenders that it's your fault that the entire Democratic establishment abandoned you between 2021 and 2025. Like it's your fault. It's not that the entire leadership structure of the Democratic Party abandoned you while the Republicans doubled and tripled and quadrupled down on attacking you. It's you overplayed it. If you had only been a little more moderate in your requests to be treated like human beings, the fascists who lie about everything all the time wouldn't have lied about you. Okay, I believe you. No, I believe you. You missed the beginning of the interview. I missed nothing. I skipped the beginning of the interview. What's with the monochrome fetish? Black and white makes you smarter.
Refer to myself. And that made the metaphor break.
If you have to
building a broader coalition of trans rights. Just this little segment right here, 3 minutes. Just give it to me.
Be perfect on every trans rights issue for us to say you can be an ally and part.
Wow, revolutionary talking point here.
Of our coalition, then we're going to have a cap of about 30% on our coalition. If we are going to have 50% plus one, or frankly, more necessarily 60% or more in support of non-discrimination protections for trans people, in support of our ability to get the health care that we need, by definition, it will have to include a portion of the 70% who oppose trans people's participation in sports. And right now, the message from so many...
So those people then will have to capitulate. The people who support trans rights except for their participation in sports will have to take the L. And if you don't think they can do that, then why should we be expected to take the L on this? How many concessions should we have to be expected to take, you know? You can build a big tent coalition where you can accept the support of people who don't agree with you on everything. That's fine, right? I bet you a lot of Mamdani and Bernie supporters don't agree with him on everything, you know? You have to create a compelling, charismatic advocacy for those groups, which, by the way, the Democrats just gave up on doing completely. Just completely gave up on doing it. So let's not pretend the Democrats gave it any kind of good effort. There was no coalition building here. The Democrats just dropped the subject completely. Just hands up, dropped it. Like, yeah, sorry, you need a bit of involvement for one of the two political parties. in this country. You need some kind of like institutional backing. Otherwise, you're kind of out on your own against the well-organized, multi-billion-dollar Republican propaganda apparatus and all the media channels they control and work with. So if people are like, yeah, I think the trannies should be able to like go to work and stuff, but I don't want them playing sports with my little girl, then they can eat shit and they can vote Democrat is what they can do. And if they don't like it, then that's tough. They can perish for all I care. Why should we let people who are wrong determine the front line of the advocacy effort? What about all the people who are like, well, yeah, I like support gay people's right to marry, but they shouldn't be able to adopt. Would you be out here on the podcast being like, we have to drop the gay people adopting issue, okay? We're losing support in the coalition. No, you tell them yourself, you will get the civil rights. You may support 80% of it. Listen, question, if you support 99% of a civil rights effort, but disagree on the 1%, what the f are you doing opposing it? Because by opposing it, you're supporting the 99% you disagree with and the 1% you do agree with. Why the f are we the ones that have to capitulate when you're supposedly on our side for most of the important issues? You're either with us or against us. It's a two-front battle here. You don't get to hem and haw over it. Why the f are we the ones who have to back off?
You're not welcome. And your support for 90% of these policies is irrelevant.
Who the f says this, by the way? Who sees a person who says, like, I will vote for the Democrats because I agree with 90% of their position on trans issues, but not 10%, and says, no, we don't want your vote. We don't want your 90% support. Why can't you just say, yeah, we'll take that and everything along with it? Yoink. Who the f says that? We're talking about in the context of voting, right? Because McBride is like a dipshit, spineless lib. So, like, McBride isn't, like, out here talking about what? Throwing, you know, Molotovs at carbs, you know, we're talking about, like, electoral participation. You vote Democrat or Republican. So if a person agrees to support 90% of trans rights, they're voting Democrat. Who the f else they got to vote for? Take the vote. Yoink!
The fact that you diverge on one thing makes you evil. And it also misunderstands the history of civil rights in this country.
Oh, yeah, I bet. Tell me about MLK, baby. Do these people never get, like, bored with this shit? It's the same talking point every time, man. Like, this discourse has been reiterated and played through so many times. You'd think, maybe not McBride, because she's like, I don't know how online she is. Ezra Klein's been doing this for a long time. Doesn't this get tedious after a while? Can you imagine if I, right now at my position, at my level of success, pardon me for tooting my own horn, my streams are pretty big. Can you imagine right now if I went live every day and I was like, the woke-skulled left is why we didn't win in 2024, because purity testing leftists turned away people who supported the left on 90%. Like, what are you doing here? Man found in jungle 30 years after war ended. He's still fighting. Like, what the f? Can you imagine? Jesus Christ. In this political environment?
You can't compromise on civil rights is a great tweet. But tell me, which Civil Rights Act delivered all progress and all civil rights for people of color in this country?
Sure. Which civil rights issues did Martin Luther King Jr. capitulate on in his rhetoric? Name one. Was he like, okay, we believe that we should be able to vote, but I don't think that, you know, colored should be able to use the white bathrooms? Tell me. Well, 72% of white respondents said that they would be okay with black people having marginally better bathrooms, but they don't like the idea of sharing them. No, sir. My problem with Martin Luther King Jr. is that he alienates good white progressives who don't agree with him on every element of, you know, Negro activism by insinuating that if you support him, you support all of his positions. And if you don't, you don't. Like, these people, man.
Country. The Civil Rights Act of 1957, the Civil Rights Act of 1960, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Oh, shit, she knows the years.
The Civil Rights Act of 1968, or any of the Civil Rights Acts that have been passed since the 1960s. That movement was disciplined, it was strategic, it picked its battles, it picked its fights.
And yeah, so what civil rights issues did they capitulate on? What did MLK Jr. say? Like, well, okay, we're willing to take the L on that one. If you support everything else but that issue, like, we won't accept your support. Like, where did this happen? This discourse. Where did this happen?
And it compromised to move the ball forward. And right now.
No, what compromise? I genuinely want to know. What compromise did MLK Jr. push for? I know he pushed for compromise because he was like representing a huge movement that was tied to like legal rights, right? So there were things like he wasn't able to push for like everything he wanted immediately, for sure. But like, at what point did MLK Jr. say like, no, we believe that the white bigots are right on this one. There are too many white people who disagree with us on this issue, so we're not going to push for it. And as a matter of fact, we're going to allow those people to dictate like the terms by which we advocate for our own rights. Capitulation is understandable when you're talking about legislation to an extent, like if you've got a big bill that you're trying to push through. But when it comes to like advocacy for specific, what bill was there that would have mandated trans women to participate in sports with cis women? Like, what are we even talking about right now? Are we talking about Twitter activists? Are we talking about Democratic politicians? Like, what are we? By the way, okay, people like Ezra Klein like to bitch and moan about how the Democrats get forced to answer for the behavior of every Twitter activist, but then they'll do the exact same thing themselves when they broadly gesture at the left. And they'll be like, you know, they'll like paint this very, very broad picture that somehow includes within it like Democratic politicians who were like pretty on the ball about supporting trans people, and also Twitter activists. Were the Democratic politicians the ones who were not accepting the support of anyone who didn't agree with them in lockstep about everything? Or were the Twitter activists? Were the Twitter activists the one pushing for a bill? Trans women were already able to play sports with cis women. The like Title IX provisions didn't explicitly prohibit it based on the legal interpretations that existed at the time. So what advocacy are we talking about? The only advocacy we could be talking about with regard to trans women participating in sports with cis women, like, would have been the social battlefield, you know? But it would have meant capitulating ground that had already existed. You push for progress and accept compromise. You don't get progress by pushing compromise. Yeah. What? Okay, tell me, what practical pro-trans rights movement or legal push was there in this country that could have won overwhelming public support if it wasn't for the support for trans people in cis people sports? Where trans people already can play in cis people sports, except in the states that have banned it. In many cases, there were only like a dozen active transgender women playing in sports in a state or less. So like, should we have gone along with the right-wing propagandizing? Should we have been like, yeah, I support trans rights, but like, yeah, the 3 trans women who are getting somewhere between 2nd and 14th place in the various interregional high school athletics departments across the state of Iowa, they need to go. Like, should we have like partially capitulated? Should the right-wing media have been like, this penis-having male is raping high school girls with their sports activity, and then showing them with like a bronze medal on a little stage? And should we have been like, yeah, I agree selectively with that point, but I still think trans people should be treated with respect? Tell me, like, what point we should have stepped in and capitulated on this? You all understand the point that I'm making, right? Like, it's not only that I disagree with McBride and Ezra Klein on their politics, the actual like strategy they're proposing is delusional. Like they're describing a reality that doesn't exist. They're describing a made-up reality where like the left as a coalition turned their back on a reasonable compromise, as opposed to what really happened, which was a rising fascist movement made trans people the scapegoat, and they chose trans female athletes in high school sports or whatever as like an easy a viable target, and then the Democrats dropped support for trans people entirely in a vain effort to appeal to a broad majority that didn't manifest. And now advocates for that Democratic majority are blaming the left because their strategy of dropping trans rights didn't manifest that big public support. Sorry, listen, okay, just put the transgender rights in the bag. I don't give a shit. Sorry. You're not winning me over with this bullshit fake incrementalism. Like, you listen, incrementalism is supposed to be incrementalism forward, not backward, okay? The pitch for incrementalism is that it gets things done in the right direction. You're slowly walking backwards. I don't buy this.
That compromise would be deemed unprincipled, weak, and throwing everyone under the bus. And that is so counterproductive. It is so harmful, and it completely betrays the lessons of every single social movement and civil rights.
You're betraying MLK Jr. when you don't screech trannies are raping our kids in the sports or whatever, along with Fox News or whatever. I don't know. Crazy. I hate her so much. Yeah. She is the weak link. Well, they all are, the liberals, I guess.
Movement in our country's history. And we have an example of a very successful social movement in recent history with marriage equality. Where would we have been in 2007 and 2008 if not only we had not tolerated the fact that Barack Obama was ostensibly not for marriage equality then, but if we had said to voters...
For one, people didn't. There was tons of backlash against Obama and Hillary Clinton for being snaky and disingenuous about their support for same-sex marriage. That happened. That happened. I was there. You can't. How old is Sarah McBride? You're not gaslighting me on this. You're 4 years older than me. You were there too. Okay. There were tons and tons of people at that time who were furious at the, you know, at everything after Don't Say Gay, like these like pathetic hemming and hawing efforts to legitimize gay people that were obviously just Democrats being afraid to take a stand on an issue.
If you're not comfortable, even if you vote against the marriage ban, but aren't quite comfortable with marriage yet, that you're a bigot and you don't belong in our coalition.
See, again, like this is like fantasy shit. What are we talking about? Marriage equality was ratified by the Supreme Court. What culture war, like you're a bigot if you don't support Obergefell argument are you making? Genuinely, like you're not referring to a thing that happened. What happened was, for decades and decades and decades, people in this country have advocated for gay people's right to marry, and their tireless advocacy led to more and more states passing statewide, you know, like allowing for gay marriage, and eventually the Supreme Court ruled on it. And within those states, yes, there were lots of people accused of being bigots because they were bigots. Obviously. I'm sorry, what was the anti-gay marriage but not a bigot coalition? Would you remember what anti-gay marriage advocacy looked like? Republicans calling them pedophiles mostly and saying that God told them that gay people couldn't marry. Yeah, they were bigots. They still are. It was like the argument McBride wants you to believe in here is that gay marriage was won by quieting the activists through a sensible, moderate coalition of the good activists like her and Democrats and Republicans and centrists who didn't really get the whole men loving each other thing, but were supportive because, you know, they had been talked to so nicely by people who weren't mean and called them a bigot. Absolute insanity, fake reality. They completely imagined just like, you have to be such a disingenuous cunt or be so delusional to push this version of reality. You were there. Yet famously, civil rights have been won by the activists capitulating to the sensibilities of the people who are bigoted against them. That's how MLK Jr. won. So yeah, what did whites uncomfortable with black integration want back in, you know, the 60s? Oh yeah, no, MLK wouldn't die until a few years later. No, yeah, that wasn't workable at all.
Where would that movement had been? The most effective messengers were the people who had evolved themselves. We had grace personified in that movement, and it worked.
Remember, a liberal is a person who supports every civil rights movement except for the current one, and opposes every previous war except for the current one. Yeah, man, that's how the gay rights movement won. It was through grace and compromise. I remember, it definitely wasn't a bunch of, like, wild SoCal queers screaming at people and holding, like, raucous pride parades every year, accusing people correctly of being bigots. MLK famously said we need to appeal more to moderate whites. I remember that, yeah. In a letter from a Birmingham jail, he says, the moderate white is the sorry, you all get so hung up when I say what he says, the black man's greatest ally.
Beyond even the advocates' wildest expectations in terms of the speed of both legal progress and cultural progress. Because we created incentives for people to grow, we created space for people to grow, and we allowed people into our tent, into that conversation who weren't already with us.
This just didn't happen. What actually happened was pro-gay marriage and pro-gay people generally, activists were so loud and so culturally powerful that it became more and more socially unacceptable to oppose them. Through power, they convinced people to join them until eventually that was the social norm. In 1985, being homophobic was the norm. To be pro-gay was standard. In 2015 in California, to be pro-gay is the norm. It takes active effort to be a homophobe against gay marriage in California in 2015. Power is how you win, not capitulation.
You mentioned the period in 2008 when Barack Obama was running for president. And at the very least, his public position, many of us suspected it was not his private position, but his public position, was that he opposed gay marriage. That was the mainstream position at that point in the Democratic Party. And there was a compromise position they all supported, which was civil unions. Is there an analogy to the civil unions debate or position for you now?
You mean the thing that didn't work? I'm sorry, who was convinced by civil unions that wouldn't have been convinced by gay marriage? No, seriously, nobody bought that. The half measure didn't work. Nobody wanted civil unions. No, the reason gay people wanted marriage wasn't for the tax benefits. They wanted it for the public legitimacy. Also, private public position, the term there is lying. They lied. They believed something more progressive, but they were cowards. They didn't adopt it. No, this public-private position thing is morally reprehensible. And the fact that you could launder it by calling it anything other than lying or cowardly hiding your position, ridiculous. Cowards are strategic. It's not good strategy.
I think on the sports conversation, it's local control. It's allowing for individual athletic associations to make those individual determinations.
That already exists. That's literally already there. That already exists. That is the default.
And in some cases, they'll have policies that strike a right balance. In some cases, they'll have policies that are too restrictive. And I think that is the equivalent to the civil union's position in that debate. By allowing for Democratic voters, independent voters, hell, even some elected officials to take that civil union's position, one that met voters where they were, it gave some of our politicians who needed it an off-ramp so that they didn't have to choose between being all on or all off.
Okay, you know what? Let's test this really quickly, okay? Let's test this really, really, really quickly. So here is the famous Pew Research graph right here. Public support for same-sex marriage, running from 2007 to 2017, okay? 404, that's fine. We'll just zoom in. Okay? So here in the dark, I don't know why they choose basically the same color. Dark brown is the oppose, and the light brown is in favor. And the crossing point here was sometime between 2010 and 2011, where you have more support than opposition. All the way up to, let's see, 2015, you have Obergefell. And after Obergefell, actually, you have a dip in support. Why? Conservative backlash. Since it's been made a national issue, you have a lot more active pushback, okay? But after that, the number continued to go up. So support for gay marriage, whoosh. Now, interestingly, here is a chart of the support for civil unions from 2003 to 2009. Now, you might note that from the beginning, since this starts in 2003, we can only really start the chart at 2007, support for civil unions is flatly higher. But then it doesn't change. You know why? Because if you try to move people over to a progressive position by offering capitulation, they support capitulation. You have a bump right here, of course, in 2008. That's when, in 2008, by the way, that's you know what they were talking about with Barack Obama, the public-private position. But 2008 was right before gay marriage became more supported than opposing gay marriage. So Obama took the capitulated public-private position when his public opinion was down 2 points. That's how cowardly he was. Within the Democratic Party, that's how cowardly he was. But in spite of that, even though you have a tick up here from 2008 and onward, the overall support for civil unions didn't really change that much. In fact, it seems like there was a decrease in between 2005 and 2008. But support for gay marriage skyrocketed. Look at this. It went from 37 in support to 62 in support in 10 years. Do you think this was due to advocacy for civil unions? No. It was due to the cultural prominence of gay people, overwhelming social power that eventually made it socially intolerable to be homophobic. That's what happened. I know it's crazy because nowadays, like, every high schooler is either a neo-Nazi or a communist, but like, there was an observable window of time in my life where I remember that being gay in like elementary school was a punchline universally thought of like as derisive. But in 2011, when I graduated high school, if you were a homophobe, that was like actually cringe. I remember that was like actually cringe. In elementary school, it was just a bad word. When I graduated high school, it was like, oh, you're actually a homophobe? Like, what the f? Are you like a cringe boom? Are you like a Republican, like Christian boomer? Like, what the f? Like, seriously? Old head? Mother. Well, it is California. Sure, it's California. But it does speak to a trend that's demonstrated in the data. I reject fundamentally this ridiculous ahistorical idea that the way you win public support is through compromise, capitulation, and backpedaling. No, it's through overwhelming power. I mean, you could ask Sarah McBride. Sarah McBride is a Zionist. Zionists have way the more money behind their social cause than gay people did back in 2008. Which strategy have they settled on for trying to win the support of Americans? Capitulating, walking back, acknowledging that Israel is a genocidal apartheid state, trying to meet people halfway, trying to meet people at the idea that Israel is a Jewish state that should exist but maybe shouldn't exist in the form that it does, or blanket, non-stop advocacy, you know, just covering the airwaves. Is McBride funded by AIPAC? She's a Zionist. I don't know if she has any AIPAC money, but it doesn't really matter.
And it allowed that conversation to continue and prevented...
It's not a conversation. Gay rights were not won through a conversation. It was won through power. This insane, like, jerk-off delusion that civil rights movements are won because of a dialogue between the people who are advocating for their rights and the people who want to take away their rights is just insane. That's not how it works. It's not how it's ever worked. Well, then is there a path for trans rights? Of course there is, through overwhelming social power. Yeah, same as for gay rights. We're dealing with a fascist pushback right now, but yeah, just if you disagree with us, you should be shamed and have a miserable life. Obviously. You all think that about people who are openly, virulently racist, don't you? Like a guy who just runs around saying the hard R everywhere. Like, no, we should have a conversation. No, I just think he should be like stigmatized and shamed and like not have an easy time socializing with people. I'm not saying he should be arrested. I'm just saying, like, you know, nobody should like him. Oh, so you don't want to have the conversation? No, I don't think there's a conversation happening. I just don't think he likes black people. The vast majority of bigots change their mind not because somebody convinced them to change their mind, but because they got exposed to so many social signifiers that it was acceptable to change their mind. Shame motivates people way the more than rationality does. Have you talked to people? Have you interacted with people in your life? Ever? The sane washing of the bigot? Ever the job of the liberal? No, I'm sure the white reactionaries back in the 1960s wanted to have a great conversation. I bet they had lots of reasonable concerns. And MLK won by moderately capitulating to the most pronounced of those concerns, you know? Yeah. I'm sure. What if she's lining up for a Fox News grift tour? No, I've got worse news for you. She's just the median Democrat. Didn't MLK also call the white liberal fickle too? Buddy, MLK hated the white liberal, the white moderate. He was inventing new slurs for them. They were far more hateful than anything MLK Jr. had ever been called in his life, and they earned it. Yes, sir. The comment section under the video was insufferable. You can't have absolutism on the left or right without authoritarianism. Yep, seems like it. Hello, I have a very high IQ. My opinion is, when the left gets mad at me for being bigoted, I say that the real authoritarianism is when they say they don't like it, that I think trans women should not use the same bathrooms as cis women. I'm very smart. Please give me a Substack and like a podcast, you know, and like a Patreon. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride towards freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. Never let them sanitize MLK. Never let them get away with MLK was the liberal and Malcolm X was the socialist. They were both socialists. They had different approaches, certainly.